Story of Moses and Pharaoh. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And on a certain occasion he drove his flock into the inner part of the desert, and came to the mountain of God, on his way towards Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and, behold, the bush burned with fire, but was not consumed. And Moses said, I will go and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he went forward, he called to him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he answered, Here I am. And he said, Come not nigh hither. Put off thy shoes from thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said to him, I have surely seen the affliction of my people in Egypt, and I have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of the land into a good and large land, into a land flowing with milk and honey. Come now, therefore, and I will send thee to Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent. I am slow of speech, and of a slow tongue. And the Lord said to him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. Moses, however, entreated, and God appointed his brother Aaron to be his spokesman. Then Moses took his wife and his sons, and returned to the land of Egypt, for God had told him to return, and that all the men were dead who sought his life. And the Lord said to Aaron, Go into the wilderness to meet Moses. And he went, and he met him in the mount of God and kissed him. After Moses and Aaron had told the Israelites that God would deliver them from the Egyptians, they went to Pharaoh and said, The Lord God of Israel saith unto you, Let my people go, that they may serve me. Then Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice, to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. Pharaoh, you see, neither knew nor cared anything about the true God. But he, as well as all his people, worshipped many animals, such as bulls, serpents, and crocodiles. As the Egyptians had their false gods that they worshipped, so he thought that the Israelites had their own God. But as he did not own him as the true God, he would not obey his wishes. He found the work that the Israelites did so valuable that he was not willing to part with them. He told the taskmasters not to give them any straw, to make their bricks as they used to do, but let them go out and get the straw for themselves, and they were to make just as many bricks every day as they had done before they had to find the straw. So the poor people went looking about for straw, and the taskmasters said to them, Come, make haste, Finish your daily tasks." But they could not finish them. So the taskmasters beat them. When they complained to Pharaoh, he only said, "You are idle. You are idle." However, God saw their trouble and sorrow and heard their groaning. He said to Moses and Aaron, "Go again to Pharaoh and take your rod with you. Throw it down before the king, and it shall become a serpent." Then Moses and Aaron did so. When Pharaoh saw the rod changed into a serpent, he said, "My wise men can do the same." He called them, and they threw down their rods, and they became serpents too. But Aaron's rod swallowed up theirs. The next day Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "The Lord God of the Hebrews says that if you will not let his people go, he will send terrible plagues over your land." Pharaoh did not heed. So God sent the first terrible trouble or plague upon Egypt. God said to Moses, "Tell Aaron to stretch his rod over the Nile and over all the streams and ponds, and the water shall be changed to blood." And Aaron did so, and all the waters were turned into blood, and all the fishes in the river died, and instead of water there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. This plague lasted 7 days. At the end of that time, God said that he would bring another plague upon the land of Egypt if Pharaoh still refused to let the Israelites go. Pharaoh did not heed. So God told Moses to say to Aaron, "Stretch forth your rod over the rivers, the streams, and the ponds, and cause frogs to come up out of them, and cover the land." This was the second plague. This was so unpleasant that Pharaoh said to Moses and Aaron, "Pray to your God to take away the frogs, and I will let your people go." So they asked God to take away the frogs, and God made them die out of all the houses and the fields, and the Egyptians put them together in heaps. When this trouble was over, Pharaoh would not keep his promise to let the Israelites go. So God sent the third plague. Aaron stretched out his rod over the dust of the land, and it became lice. These creeping insects came upon all the Egyptians, and upon their beasts too. Still, Pharaoh was not sorry. Then came the plague of flies, and this was followed by the plague of boils, or blains, or sore pimples on man and beast. But Pharaoh still hardened his heart, and he would not let the people go. Then came the plague of hail. It thundered very loud and long, and the lightning was like fire running along the ground. It was an awful sight, and the large stones of hail knocked down and killed all the men and beasts who were in the fields. The trees were bent, and many were broken in this fearful storm. And the barley and the flax, and many green herbs besides, were torn to pieces by its fury. Pharaoh was frightened at the loud, long thundering, and at the fierce lightning so seldom heard and seen in Egypt. And he said to Moses, "Pray to God for me. It is enough. I will let you go, and ye shall stay no longer." And Moses did so. But when Pharaoh saw that the danger was past, that it thundered no more, and that the hail ceased, then he said, "I will not let the people go." Then came the plague of locusts. And as this did not make Pharaoh keep his word and let the Israelites go from Egypt, God sent a plague of darkness. Pharaoh now was willing to let the people go, but he said, "You shall not take your herds with you." Moses said, when they went, they must take all that they had. Then was Pharaoh very angry, and he would not let them go. Now God sent a 10th plague over the land of Egypt. 9 fearful plagues had already swept over the land of Egypt, and Pharaoh was still obstinate and self-willed. But the time was now coming for him to obey the command of God and to let the Israelites go. In the middle of the night, the 10th awful trouble came. For in that hour of stillness and of darkness, God smote all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. Every Egyptian household was awakened from its sleep to see the dying pain of its best loved one. For there was not a house where there was not one dead. An exceedingly great and bitter cry of fear and grief was heard throughout all the land of Egypt. All were mourning for their slain ones. They could not see the hand that dealt the blow, but they knew that it was given by the God of the Israelites for their many cruelties to his people. In great alarm, in the middle of the night, Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "Rise up and go away out of my land, you and the Israelites. Go and serve the Lord as you said. Take your flocks and herds and be gone, and bless me also." But how could the Israelites leave the land of Egypt at such a short notice? And in the middle of the night, too. They were all ready to do so, though it was in the middle of the night. While every household in Egypt was awake, mourning for its dead, every household of Israel was awake, keeping a feast. Moses had told them to prepare for the journey, for on that very night God would make Pharaoh consent to let them go out of their bondage. God had said, "Tell them, I will pass through the land of Egypt about midnight, and all the firstborn, both of man and beast, in the land of Egypt shall die. But I will pass over your houses and not smite your firstborn. You must kill a lamb and sprinkle its blood on your doorposts with hyssop. Then, when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague will not destroy you. You must all stay indoors that night and eat a feast, while the Lord is passing through the land to destroy the Egyptians. This feast is to be called the Feast of Passover. You must keep it each year and eat it then, as you will eat it tonight." Then God told them to take the lamb, whose blood they had sprinkled on the doorposts, and to roast it whole. Each family was to have its Passover lamb. It was to be a lamb without disease or fault of any kind. After they had eaten as much as they had required, they were to save none of it till morning, but to burn with fire what was left. This was because meat, in a hot country like Egypt, soon turns bad, And it is not proper that part of a sacrifice to God should be spoiled and become corrupt. The lamb was to be eaten with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs, first of all, to remind them of the heavy and bitter bondage that they had suffered in Egypt. It was to teach them, too, that sin corrupts and spreads like leaven, and that, like the bitter herb, it is a bitter and evil thing. They were to eat it with their girdles tightened around their waists, with their shoes on their feet, with their staves in their hands, and to eat it in haste, so as to be ready at a moment's notice when the order came to start on their journey. Some of the things that we can think about in this story are: what did Moses see in the desert? Who spoke to him from the burning bush? What was he told to do? Why would not Pharaoh let the Israelites go? What plagues did God send on Egypt? What terrible plague was the last? Can you describe the feast of the Passover?